This Day in Sports History. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. More great podcasts and more info can be found at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's May 3rd, and we've finally come to Game 7 of the 1981 NBA Eastern Conference Finals, aka the greatest playoff series in NBA history. In a series that was tight, filled with drama, tension, great shots, terrific performances, Game 7 definitely saved the best for last. Philadelphia had Boston on the ropes after Game 4, up 3-1. The Sixers had leads in both Games 5 and 6, only to cough them up and let Bird, McHale, Parrish, Cornbread Maxwell, Tiny Archibald and company come back and beat them in the final minutes. Game 6 was an emotionally intense game, with fans and players getting into an altercation that the Celtics used as fuel to the fire to win at the Spectrum for the first time in 2 years. That switched the series back to Boston for Game 7 with a trip to the finals to face the Houston Rockets on the line. Only 3 teams had been able to come back from a 3-1 deficit and win the series. Of course, the Celtics had done it first in '68 when they found themselves down 3-1 to, who else? Philadelphia, and came back to win. Well, after winning 2 in a row, Boston felt like they had the momentum and the psychological advantage going into Game 7 after stealing Game 6 on the road. The game was fast and furious from the opening tip. Think Vin Diesel versus Jason Statham on a collision course to an incredible shootout. Just like in the previous games, though, the Sixers were able to open up a nice lead. Rookie Andrew Toney had been a killer in this series and was soon to get the nickname the Boston Strangler because of how he played every time against the Celtics. But this was not Toney's best game of the series. In fact, in terms of production, it was his worst. But he was able to give Philly its largest lead with a couple of jumpers to put them up by 11. Even though the Sixers shot 63% from the field compared to Boston's 40% in the first 24 minutes, their 10 first-half turnovers let Boston back in the game, and by the time the half ended, the Celtics were only down 5. It was the 6th time in the series that Philly had taken a lead to the locker room. The third quarter was like a Rocky versus Apollo Creed fight, punches constantly thrown by both fighters. Bird was doing it on both ends, first with a 3 to get him going.
Tiny to Ford, Larry Bird, three-point play.
And then a block on Dr. J on the other end.
And Cheeks comes down with it. Sixers running, Irving on the left. Here's the Doc against Bird. Bird made a tremendous block. What a defensive play by Larry Bird.
That led to an assist from Larry Legend to Cedric Maxwell. As the third quarter horn sounded, it was a 4-point Sixers lead, but tempers were flaring.
Feeds it to Bobby Jones, 1 second to go, and that'll do it for the third quarter. And we have an altercation. Bobby Jones, and now both benches start to come over to the corner of the Boston Celtics bench. Bobby Jones is in a sea of white jerseys over
CBS's Dick Stockton incorrectly said it was Bobby Jones mixing it up with Boston's Rick Roby. Instead, it was reserve Sixer Steve Mix pushing and shoving with Roby, but it just ramped up the tension in the Garden going into the final 12 minutes, and Boston soon took the lead. The sound in the Garden was deafening after Tiny Archibald pulled the trigger on a left-handed jumper. The Celtics went on an 8-0 run to extend their advantage, but the Sixers punched back, and they went on a 12-1 run of their own, led by the Doctor.
The 76ers, who had a 3-1 lead in the series and had game number 5 wrapped up, lost game 6, leading game 7, and Julius hits a big 2-pointer. And now
Philly went back up by 7 with 6 to play. With things looking a bit grim for the Celtics at that point, the rookie Bird showcased what he would be known for throughout his entire career, an intense desire to win and making crucial buckets when they were needed. Dick Stockton set the tense scene with time eroding.
6-point lead, 4.5 to go. Will Celtic pride win out, or will Philadelphia's determination to get another shot at that elusive title win out? We'll find. We'll find out soon. Irving, intercepted by Bird. That's greatness. Tiny Archibald. Watch out for Caldwell Jones.
Tiny hit the free throws. Bird would disrupt the next time down, and the Celtics kept on coming. Now tied with 90 seconds to play, Bird came up with that pivotal bucket.
Into Dawkins, double team. Dawkins goes in, misses. Here comes Bird out of the pack. 1:05 to go. Larry Bird pulls up, and the Celtics lead.
That Bird bank shot gave Boston 91 points and a 2-point lead, and it was all they would need. The Sixers' next trip down the floor, Mo Cheeks was fouled hard on a drive to the bucket, and still a little bit dazed from that collision, he missed the first free throw, but he made the second, and it was a 1-point game with 29 seconds left. The Celtics had the ball, but at least they had to take a shot. ML Carr missed the shot. Bobby Jones rebounded and called timeout with 1 second left. And now, for the second time in 3 games, Philly had the ball out of bounds at midcourt with 1 second left and a chance to win it. And they failed. The play was to set a back screen for Julius Erving and throw an alley-oop. The screen was set, Erving was in place and surprisingly open, but the oop had a little too much alley on it.
Could be win or lose right here. 1 second to go. Philly could win or lose, barring a foul. Bobby Jones will throw the ball in from right in front of our table as Darryl Garrettson moves the security people away. Larry Bird will defend. Here it is. It's over. The Boston Celtics have won it.
Boston won Game 7, 91-90, the 5th of the 7 games decided by 2 points or less. Bird and Dr. J matched each other in this one with 23 points apiece. Bird averaged 27, 13 rebounds, and 5 assists in the series, but was surprisingly not named Series MVP. That went instead to Cedric Maxwell, who averaged 16, 6, and 2. Boston went on to beat the Rockets in the NBA Finals in 6 games. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1987, it was the Winston 500 at Talladega Super Speedway. This race was one of the most important in the history of NASCAR that led to significant changes. Bill Elliott sat on the pole after leaving a vapor trail on the track in qualifying. His record qualifying speed of 212 miles per hour was spectacular, and certainly more than fed NASCAR fans' need for speed. But there were a lot of folks who wondered if they were sitting on a powder keg with a box of matches in their hand. Cale Yarborough had been the first to run 200-plus in qualifying back in 1983 at Daytona, and the cars got progressively faster. 210 miles an hour was seen as that dividing line between excitement and lunacy. In '86, cars had knocked on that door but had not yet crossed the threshold. But here a year later, the top 8 had crossed over that 210-mile-per-hour mark. NASCAR Super Speedway cars were approaching numbers that Indy cars were at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And it was making a lot of folks nervous, and a lot of those guys were in the garage. Change typically needs a catalyst, and the one that was about to happen could have certainly had catastrophic and deadly consequences. Fortunately, it did not. On lap 21, Bobby Allison was cruising around in the pack at 210 miles an hour when his engine blew up. Parts of the engine flew off, cutting his right rear tire, and he lost control.
Oh, we have a problem. Bobby Allison with a horrible crash here on the front stretch. It has torn out a complete section of protective railing separating it. Alan Kowicki becomes involved.
Debris and is collecting other cars. There was a lot of debris in the front stretch. Kowicki was involved. Richard Petty, I think. is another one of the cars. Lots of debris on the front stretch. Now, Bobby's car, to me, appeared to stay together quite well. He did get up into the fencing, but not into the stands.
And it was close, though. He has torn out a whole large area of guardrail. There it is, protecting the crowd from the racetrack, and he came very, very close to going into the stands. The car became airborne and went flying literally into that wall and catch fencing, but fortunately it did stay onto the racetrack.
The catch fence did its job, keeping Allison's flying car from going into the seats. Allison was able to walk away from his wrecked race car, and as he looked at the carnage that his car had caused, he worried that he'd seriously injured or killed somebody. Fortunately, only 4 fans suffered minor injuries. The race was red flagged for several hours as repairs were made to the fence and the debris on the racetrack was cleaned up. And that led to the race being shortened to beat sundown. Bobby was able to watch his son Davey win his first NASCAR race later in the day, but the wreck had not only rattled Bobby, but all of those in NASCAR. The speeds were too high, and something needed to happen to make the drivers and the fans safer. The first attempt at a fix was at Daytona in July, when the cars were outfitted with smaller carburetors, but that caused other problems with the cars and the drivers complained about it. That led to restrictor plates being added to the carburetor to reduce the intake of air into the engine and slow the cars down. That's had the unexpected consequence of bunching the cars up when they race at Daytona and Talladega, which has led to exciting racing, but it's also been a cause for some other horrific crashes. Even without Bobby Allison's catch fence crushing crash, NASCAR would have found a way to slow the cars down eventually. It just may not have happened as quickly. But his horrifying wreck on this day in '87 was the catalyst that led to a much-needed change. All right, how about another form of racing? And since the 151st running of the Kentucky Derby is today, let's go back and look at 2 previous runnings that ended with surprising results. On this day in 2003, it was a very unlikely Funny Cide that won the Run for the Roses. This is a buy one lottery ticket and win a mega $1 million Powerball on your first try kind of story. But this story doesn't start on this day, and with 3-year-olds racing the Derby, all of these horses' stories starts a few years back. But Funny Cide's funny story goes back to 1995. Horse racing is an expensive blue blood sport, most of the time. But on Memorial Day weekend in '95, a group of New York guys were hanging out in a backyard in Saratoga, drinking beer and grilling up some burgers and dogs. They didn't know much about horse racing, but the conversation turned to horses, and somebody said, "Why don't we buy a racehorse?" So they thought that was a good idea, and they started a racehorsing syndicate, each tossing in $5,000 to buy a racehorse. Now, for 99% of us, that would be like tossing a wad of money out of a plane and hoping it was going to land in a bank account. Well, 7 years later, they had enough money and the guys spent $75,000 to purchase Funny Cide. The gelding did have a little pedigree as the grandson of '77 Triple Crown winner Seattle Slew. But now they needed a trainer, and enter Barclay Tagg, who was a Bud Light guy in a Pappy Van Winkle world. Now, they did have some success in the run-up to the Derby, and while Funny Cide was not one of the favorites, he also wasn't the longest of long shots. Adding to the story, they hired jockey Jose Santos, a guy who had not ridden top-level Triple Crown potential winners for a decade or more. On race day, it was like the townies showing up to swim in the country club pool. The Saratoga boys rolled into the Derby grounds in a yellow school bus, lined wall-to-wall with igloo chests of domestics ready to race. Empire Maker was the favorite at 5-2. Funny Cide went off as a 12-1 underdog. When the gates opened, Funny Cide got a great break, and he was running third by the half-mile pole. As they made the turn for home, Funny Cide was in the mix and looking strong.
Empire Maker's giving it all. Funny Cide trying to pull off the upset here. 12-1 coming down to the line, and the gutsy gelding Funny Cide has won the 129th Kentucky Derby with jockey Jose Santos aboard.
It was one of the most unlikely success stories in sports that is usually relegated to nearly unbelievable movies. Funny Cide became the first horse trained in New York to win the Derby and the first gelding to win the Derby since 1929. On this day in 1986, it was an even longer 17-1 long shot that raced its way to the win. It was Ferdinand who shocked the horse racing world, and who better to pull off a shocking win than Bill Shoemaker. The cagey veteran jockey broke from the gate dead last, but he moved Ferdinand up the outside and steadily into the field. By the time they made the break down the backstretch, Shoemaker had his horse on the rail and then broke away to win by 2 lengths. For Shoemaker, it was his 4th Derby win, and at 54, he became the oldest to win it, a record that still stands. For Ferdinand's 73-year-old trainer, Charlie Whittingham, it was his first ever Derby winner, and he hadn't even had a horse at Churchill Downs in the previous 26 years. All right, so that gives you a little to talk about at your local Derby party today to make it sound like you've been watching horse racing all your life. How about that? Go enjoy and have a mint julep while you're at it. Well, from horse racing to golf we go. On this day in 1964, golfer Pete Brown became the first black golfer to ever win a PGA Tour event when he won the Waco Turner Open in Oklahoma by a shot over Dan Sikes. As one of the few black golfers trying to make it on the PGA Tour, Pete suffered a lot of harassment, but he managed to deflect it with an attitude of just laugh at him and keep moving. Brown became the first black player to play in the PGA Championship later that year, making the cut and finishing 33rd. He won once more in his 17-year PGA career, that victory coming in 1970 in the Andy Williams Invitational. But he never got an invite to play in the Masters. On this day in 1970, the Jack Nicklaus-Arnold Palmer rivalry was on display in the Byron Nelson Classic. Tied after 72 holes, the two went to a sudden death playoff. On the first extra hole, Nicklaus was able to reach the 555-yard par 5 in 2 shots and then 2-putt for birdie. The 40-year-old Palmer knew Jack had the length to get to the green in 2, so he tried to duplicate it, hitting driver-driver, but he came up a little short, hit a bad pitch, and had to watch as the Golden Bear rolled in his tournament-winning putt. It was Nicklaus's 29th career title. Of the 73 he would eventually win. And in 1936 on this day, Joe Dimaggio made his major league debut with the New York Yankees in impressive fashion. He had 3 hits, including a triple, an RBI, and he scored 3 times. He was not Joltin' Joe just yet, but he was on his way. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. While electricity has proven to be a great invention, folks in Victorian England thought that electric shocks provided a great health benefit. There were several wearable devices invented, such as the electric corset and the electrotherapy belt that delivered electric impulses throughout the day to improve the health of the wearer. Or at least that was the intended purpose. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.